Hello and a very warm welcome to you wherever you may be. My name is Bayo Adewusi. Today we have on the program a man whose activities could change the lives of Muslims. Hello and a very warm welcome to you wherever you may be. My name is Bayo Adewusi. The celebrated 16th century philosopher Heraclitus once said, "Everything changes except the law of change." In Nigeria, that seems to be very apt, from the political terrain to corporate governance. At some point in time, the Debt Management Office, DMO, was always in the news in its quest for debt forgiveness. That was under the leadership of Dr. Mansour Mokhtar, now Minister of Finance. Debt forgiveness was accomplished. And in the last 4 years, the new Director General has been in charge. The thrust and tempo has been different. The new Director General of the Debt Management Office is our guest today. You'll meet him if you don't go away. The Director General of the Debt Management Office has always been an avid player in the affairs of the organization and has been with the organization for long enough. The thrust and emphasis of the organization today happen to be slightly different from what they were then, but the main focus remains the same. The Director General will further enlighten us. Welcome to the program, Dr. Abraham Nwakwo, the Director General of the Debt Management Office. Now, Dr. Nwakwo, I remember that many years ago, sir, the desire then was to, at the click of a button, know how much our indebtedness was, both on the foreign scene and local scene. Has that been accomplished? Can you, at the click of a button, achieve that?
Yes, at the click of a button now, any Nigerian can know how much Nigeria owes externally and domestically. Of course, on a continuous basis, we update Nigerians on the changes of in the debt stock, external and domestic debt stock. But more importantly, we have this constantly published on our website, www.dmo.gov.ng. So detailed information about the debt portfolio is always available on our website. So we have passed that stage of bothering about the accuracy, the authenticity of the public debt stock.
But it still happens to be an issue, either because Nigerians are not particularly patient enough or enterprising enough to find out from your website what the actual position is. It's surprising somewhat that politicians argue that we are on a particular train again, that even though we achieve debt forgiveness and according to you, our foreign debt stock is minimal, just slightly less than $4 billion. There are complaints by some politicians that Nigeria has gone a borrowing again without the knowledge of those who are supposed to know. Now, who are those supposed to know when Nigeria decides to take a foreign loan?
Well, indeed, everybody is supposed to know, but because when you talk about public debt, you are talking of a debt incurred on behalf of all Nigerians. And so you can say that everybody, every state, every group in society has a right to know when we borrow, why we borrow, and how we use the process of the borrowing. And now the issue of the public or politicians being impatient doesn't arise. I think it's their legitimate right to demand to know, to ask for clarifications, to query, to raise issues, to raise concerns, to advise, to criticize. It's the right of every Nigerian, including politicians and people on the street, to ask questions. And we accept it as our responsibility and our duty to clarify issues. Having said that, I want to confirm that in borrowing domestically and externally, we ensure that we follow the rules and regulations. It's true that in the past there have been certain lapses, but you can be sure that there has been a lot of improvement in terms of following the rules and regulations, in terms of adhering to the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, in terms of adhering to other rules and regulations. And therefore, you will find out, for example, that in 2010 appropriation bill, the borrowing program for the year has been captured explicitly in the document, so that
can that change?
It is subject.
Is it cast in stone?
It is subject to the approval of the National Assembly, the appropriation of the bill. Now, of course, every economy is dynamic. If and when there is need to review, to revise, to make a supplementary budget move up or down, you still go through the required guidelines as specified in the Constitution, as specified in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Very important thing is that the rules and regulations are being adhered to, the guidelines are being followed, the necessary stakeholders, including the National Assembly, who has specific rules to play in approving the borrowing program for the year.
Okay, so but very quickly, what's the procedure for obtaining a foreign loan?
Well, there are many steps to take, but it is critical to know that for any borrowing to take place, it has to be approved by the National Assembly in one form or the other. That's why I have explained, for example, the borrowing program for 2010 has been explicitly captured in the 2010 appropriation bill, which is currently before the National Assembly. And that includes both the plan for external borrowing and the plan for domestic borrowing. But more importantly, is the fact that the budget itself is the document that has explicitly outlined the projects and programs government wants to pursue during the year, and therefore the cost implications, and finding out how much revenue government expects to get to fund those projects and what the gap is, and therefore what must be borrowed to fill that gap. All these are captured in the budget. So the borrowing plan is not different from the budget. Actually, it is derived from the budget, which is going to be appropriated by the National Assembly.
So, but tell me, before the formal establishment of the Debt Management Office, we had a hodgepodge of organizations, the Central Bank, Ministry of Finance, taking care of our external borrowings, and probably that was why there was some difficulty in knowing the exact amount that we owe the London Club and the Paris Club. But some people are anxious and believe that even though the Debt Management Office is functioning as it should, we could go back to those days. Is that a possibility?
Well, in life, everything is possible. And the challenge of leadership, the challenge of responsibility is to find a way of making sure that only the desirable things come to happen eventually. Now, so in our own case, we are taking definite specific steps to ensure that the country does not relapse into a situation of unsustainable debt. And that's why every year we conduct what we call the debt sustainability analysis to know where we are based on our macroeconomic conditions and based on our existing portfolio, and therefore analyze and arrive at conclusions and recommendations on what we must do if we must borrow, what type of borrowing we must do, for what tenors and for what purposes, in order to remain within the acceptable limits. In addition, to prevent that type of situation, we are trying, the DMO is trying to help every state of the Federation establish its own debt management department that will take responsibility for decisions and processes of the states borrowing. And I'm happy to announce to you that all the 36 states of the Federation are cooperating with DMO, and DMO is helping them have their own debt management departments so that they can think in terms of prudence, transparency, accountability, and effective use of borrowed funds.
Okay, let me just get this correctly, Dr. Nwako. The DMO is assisting the states. It's not as if the DMO is establishing offices in the 36 states of the Federation. What's the true position?
You are right. DMO is not interested in expanding territories. DMO is just interested in producing the results. And we believe that since we have 36 state governments, and who have very serious powers of fiscal decisions and fiscal implementation, it is important that all these states have also to be very responsible, very prudent in their domestic and external borrowing. Therefore, we appealed to this group of state governors who are in the administration now, and they accepted graciously, saw a reason, and accepted for DMO to cooperate with them in order to establish their own debt management department so that they can develop institutional, organizational capabilities to effectively borrow and use borrowed funds to address the problems of their people, the problems of development projects, the problems of providing health services, good roads, water supply, the problems of providing power and all that.
Dr. Nwankwo, do the states have the capacity to manage offices similar to the debt management office in their various states?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. They could do with better capabilities, and that's why we are focusing on helping them develop their capabilities. We are helping them to build capacity. We are helping them to set up the institutions. We are helping them to go through the legal issues. We are helping them go through the human resource development issues. We are helping them deal with the issues of procedures and guidelines. We are helping them go with the issues of skills acquisition, issues of technology. And that's why we have held several workshops. We get staff of the states to be attached, to be embedded in DMO for 2 to 3 weeks, where we together with them learn how things should happen in the debt management office. We also move our team from DMO in Abuja to the various states to stay with them for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so that they are coached and they collectively try to develop the institutions at the state levels.
Okay, Dr. Nwankwo, the DMO under your leadership has been very active in organizing workshops and advocacy programs to make Nigerians more enlightened about the procedures of your office. But what exactly are you doing differently that requires all this awareness campaign?
Now, see, the thrust of our communication is to democratize public debt management knowledge. We believe that every Nigerian in the next 5 to 7 years should have adequate knowledge about public debt management so that they can raise issues, so that they can ask questions, so that they can demand for clarifications from the debt management office. We believe that this is part of the culture you need to ensure that there is effective and efficient public debt management. There has to be a demand for efficient, effective public debt management, and that demand has to come from the general public. So for DMO, who supplies the services to perform effectively, we appreciate that in the medium to long term, we need an effective demand. People must make demands on us that this is, explain to us why you have done this, and what is the impact on the economy, what is the benefit, so that we feel challenged, and so that for every step you take, you have to take into account that you have to account to various stakeholders, to the man on the street, indeed.
Yes, sir, but the man on the street, even though we use that mundane term, is in no position to challenge the debt management office. Through what channels are we pedestrians supposed to go through?
Now, there are various channels. Yes. First of all, our website is there. People can phone us. People can call us. Of course, the Nigerian press is vibrant. The Nigerian mass media is very vibrant, whether it be electronic or print media. It's very vibrant. So these are channels where people can use to explicitly ask questions, make demands. They can also phone us directly. They can also send emails to us. In any case, as I said, we have this proactive program of enlightening Nigeria, democratizing the knowledge. That's why in the past 2 years or so, we have been able to go to 30 states to talk to institutions of learning in those 30 states, so that even the youth are being made to about the culture of asking questions about public debt management. We teach them about what we are doing, and so that they're in a position to ask questions. So we believe that when they take positions of responsibility, they would have matured enough to make more serious demand on us about public debt management. So we use different channels and different fora and different media, to communicate what we are doing. And that is important because one of the goals of DMO is that in the near future, Nigeria should be known as a country that is in a position to export debt management knowledge in terms of our sourcing. For example, we expect that in the near future, we should be able to have a critical mass of people who are knowledgeable in public debt management, from direct training in DMO, from indirect training, so that other countries require their services on debt management, and therefore they will offer these services and earn revenue, foreign exchange for Nigeria. And that's why we have the plan of establishing a public debt management institute, so that we can liaise with various institutions, various universities, organize various types of programs, that we don't train only DMO staff in public debt management, but we also train others, so that we have curricula in schools and universities that focus on public debt management. We believe that Nigeria should capitalize on its experience, historical experience on debt problems, and then turn it into an advantage by Nigerians being conscious of the issues of debt, asking questions and getting knowledge on debt, so that they can also be experts in public debt management issues.
Having said all of that, sir, isn't the debt profile of every nation different?
Of course, the debt profile of every nation is different, but there are principles that are common. For example, you know that you have to relate your gross domestic product to your debt to know whether it's sustainable or not. Now, depending on the structure of your gross domestic product, you will have to define what ratio is acceptable, even though there are general critical ratios. But when you look into your own gross domestic product, is it dominated by exports? Is it monoproduct? All that will influence you to know how you adjust those critical ratios to be your own benchmarks for taking your own decisions.
Mr. Director General, sir, we succeeded in getting debt forgiveness towards the closing moments of the Obasanjo administration, and but there's a problem here. As our foreign debt went down, our domestic debt soared. Is there some defined harmony now?
Now, since after the exit from the odious external debt, there has always been harmony. Now, you are right to say that when we exited the odious foreign debts, the domestic debt soared. But there are two components of it. One is real, one is apparent. The apparent one is statistical. If you have two components that make up a total, foreign and domestic, and you drastically reduced the foreign from about 36 billion US dollars to about 3.5 billion, which means by very drastic, from 36 to 3.5. Automatically the ratio has changed. Mm-hmm. So even if nothing has happened to the domestic debt stock, its contribution to overall has dramatically changed. So it is an apparent skyrocketing of the domestic debt. It's purely statistical, but it's not real. On the other hand,
you say it's not real. What do you mean by it's not real?
Yeah, it is not real because before you exited, okay, assuming you had a total of 100 billion external and domestic, out of which
I'm sorry to be direct at this point.
Yeah.
What is the domestic debt stock as we speak?
3.2 trillion.
Okay.
Now, I was coming to that point. I wanted to separate two things. Okay. That the change you see in the ratio is accounted for by two things. One is purely statistical. One is real increase in the debt stock. That's the point I'm trying to make. Because if you had a debt stock, for example, that's 100 billion, and out of the 100 billion, 80 was external, 20 was domestic, and you went ahead and reduced the external from 80 to simply 30, for example. It means now that instead of domestic debt being just 20% of the 100, it is no more 20% because you have drastically reduced the external, because you're not talking of a ratio. Okay? Because everything has dropped from 100 to 20 plus 30, which is 50. And the 20 over 50 is certainly much bigger than 20 over 100. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so that one is statistical.
Sir, statistical. Let's deal with the real issues.
Good.
You said we have about 3.2 trillion domestic
debt. Naira.
What exactly does that mean?
What it means is that from time to time, in order to fund the budget,
yes,
government has to borrow. And after we exited from the Paris Club, we focused on borrowing. Instead of borrowing from external sources, we borrow mainly from domestic sources. Okay? Because there are reasons why you prefer borrowing from domestic sources, even though you should not neglect external borrowing completely. There has to be an optimal mix. But it makes sense that you have a good alternative source of borrowing from domestic sources so that you don't depend overly on external sources. Now, that helps you to isolate yourself from the vagaries of the international financial system. Okay? And that protects you from foreign exchange risks. That protects you from the problems of not having adequate foreign exchange to service your debt and to repay as and when due. Okay.
So for domestic borrowing, sir, what debt instruments do you use?
Well, the major instrument we use, of course, is the bond, the sovereign bond, the FGM bond. And that is important to note that before DMO started its domestic market activities proactively, the domestic debt stock was dominated by short-tenured instruments. That is, the government used to borrow mainly using treasury bills, which are 91-day instruments. But of course, that is not appropriate for funding government projects which are long-term. So there was a mismatch between the asset and the liability. So what we have done over these years, particularly consistently from 2005, is to now introduce long-tenured instruments in the market so that now we have debt instruments ranging from 3 years to 5 years, 10 years to 20 years. As you know, we introduced the 20-year bond in the market November 2008. And ever since, every month as we issue bonds of 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years.
So who are the major players on this bond market?
I can tell you everybody is a player, every group of people, but they play different roles. Mm-hmm. Of course, investment is open to everybody. The corporates, the multinationals, the individual on the street, the market women, individuals, media people like you are investing in FDM bonds. Now, but you also have the primary dealer market makers. These are financial institutions that are licensed to be in a position to always buy and sell FGN bonds. Just as you have stockbrokers, when you want to buy shares in a company, you usually buy through your stockbroker, who can, anytime you want to dispose of your share, you go to your stockbroker to sell it to those who want to buy. Mm-hmm. And any point in time you want to buy a share of any company, you go to your stockbroker and say, I want to buy the share of company XYZ. So also the primary dealer market makers are licensed to be in a position always to buy or sell FGN bonds. So they're active players. But more importantly, as I said, the most important players in the bond market are all the stakeholders, anybody who is in a position and who desires to use his savings to invest in an instrument that is very secure, that has a guaranteed income return, because the FGM bond yields interest rate every 6 months. You pay interest on it every 6 months.
What is the interest rate like?
The interest rate is not fixed. That is another beauty. The interest rate on every FGM bond is determined on the monthly auctions. You go to auction, and then those who want to invest in FGM bond tell you what rates they are ready to accept. And depending on how much you have offered for sale that month, of course, you start giving from the lowest, the person who has the lowest, for the lowest return. Because if you are selling, if you are buying something, you are buying their money. So you want to pay as low a price as possible.
So this is sounding rather complicated. Yeah. Now, if the bond market is open to pedestrians like us, we need to be sufficiently knowledgeable and have enough confidence. Yeah. How have you generated enough confidence so that the average Nigerian can just put his money there for a tenure of 3 to 20 years?
Now, there are three ways to do that. First of all, is that you have the primary dealer market makers. So you have intermediaries whom it is their job. You know, these people have been trained to represent you, just as you have your stockbrokers that in a position to buy or sell shares for you. It's their job. That's the first stage. The second stage is that what has happened empirically. You know that over the years, people have been buying or selling the bonds. Those who bought, if they don't want to hold to maturity and they need cash, you know, they can walk across the primary dealers market makers and they change their IOU for cash and solve their problems. So that's the second way you know that it's working. The third way, of course, is that all those who have invested every 6 months, they get their interest. And when these bonds mature...
And this interest are not predetermined, you said?
It's determined at the auction.
Okay.
It's predetermined at the auction. For any time you are investing, you are buying. There's an auction. Just as you auction foreign exchange, there's an auction, and at that auction, the rate that we rule for that set of bonds is determined. So you know how much you are going to be earning per month for a particular auction. And of course, the third one is that we are spending time and energy and effort to educate the people. That's the point I made before, through the mass media, through lectures in universities, through talking to market women, through talking to various associations in various fora, through having interactive sessions. For example, this morning we have an interactive session with the mass media in Lagos. And so these are ways of educating people of what the bond is, how it works. So there are various ways in which we are trying to democratize knowledge about public debt management. That's the thrust. So we believe it is a very new area. The bonds were introduced only in 2003 and started on a regular stream since 2005. So the real established resurgence of the bond market is just about 2005 to now. It's just about less than 5 years old. Okay.
I was going to say, sir, that the bond market in the early 70s or earlier, we had a thriving bond market, but it went comatose.
Yeah.
Why did that happen, and how did you revive it?
Well, the explanation, the reason can be found in the military interregnum. As you know, during the military period, which spanned nearly 18 years, a lot of things were abandoned. And the government, since those governments were also short-term governments, they were not to be there permanently. They also operated in a short-termic manner. So they looked for shortcuts for solving their problems. Okay, but since 2003, then we re-established the bond market, which, as you said...
What gave you the faith?
Well, as you know, as I said, Debt Management Office was established in 2000, and the first thrust was to deal with the problem of external debt overhang, which we dealt with. But having dealt with that, we asked ourselves the question then, particularly since 2006, what is the proactive job of public debt management? Public debt management is not about obtaining debt relief, because obtaining debt relief is like curing a disease. But after curing the disease, you have to live. How do you live a healthy life and grow? And therefore, we now identified the rules, the channels, the initiative that must be taken so that debt management serves as a platform for contributing proactively to growth, development, employment, and poverty reduction. So that's why we thought it was necessary to have a market for long-term debt instruments, not only for government to raise long-term money to solve long-term problems, but to create so that by doing so, the government creates an example. We call it benchmark. It's more like creating the example so that the private sectors which have started doing so, we start issuing, you know, now oil companies and the banks and the other corporates that are now issuing long-term bonds, 5 years, 7 years, to raise long-term money so that they can invest in agriculture, in the oil sector, in energy, in solid minerals. And that is the whole idea of reintroducing the bond market, to show that Nigerians, if you set up the right institutional and legal framework, Nigerians are ready to save long-term, to invest long-term. And that's why one of, our slogan in our advertisement these days is good investor, good citizen. Nigerians are good citizens, they are good investors, because with the right atmosphere, they have shown that they can save money and give to you, lend to you, to use to develop the economy and get their money back after 20 years. Of course.
So apart from the bond market, which you said has just resurfaced, what other debt instruments do you rely on?
Essentially, for now, we rely on the bonds. Okay. Now, of course, with that, we introduce more sophisticated instrument derivatives, index-linked bonds, and all that. But we have to be careful, and we have to take it one at a time, particularly taking into account the experience of the very developed countries 2008, 2009, because when they went into these other hybrid derivatives, things get more complicated for the regulators, and that's part of the reason why there was global economic and financial crisis. And part of the reason why we were relatively isolated from that problem was that we had not gone into those sophistications that didn't have adequate regulatory framework and adequate controls. So yes, we will get more sophisticated, but that's not our priority for now. Our priority for now is to build the foundation.
Okay, Dr. Abraham Nwako, we'll take a break right here. My producers are asking me so to do. Well, viewers, thank you very much for spending part of your time with us. This is One-on-One for this day with Dr. Abraham Nwako, the Director General of the Debt Management Office. When we come back, we'll take your text messages and phone calls and emails to make this program a lot more interactive. Please don't go away.
It's the Higher Thermocool Get Plugged In promo. Get 1.2 gigabyte 1-year internet access with a 2.5 gigabyte internet broadband modem, color printer, laptop bag, 12 months warranty, and 72 hours door-to-door nationwide delivery. When you buy an A100 Higher Thermocool laptop for as low as 11,400 Naira per month. Exclusively sold at all Cool showrooms all across Nigeria. For further information, visit www.htcool.com/ICT or any of our participating financial partners, or call our customer care line on 01-730-3333. Terms and conditions apply.
Offer valid while stock lasts. Higher Thermocool, part of your life.
Thank you very much for spending part of your time with us. If you're just joining us, this is One-on-One for this day with Dr. Abraham Nwako, the Director General of the Debt Management Office. Dr. Nwako, let's begin with a number of text messages. Helen from Uyo says, do you think some of the states have the capacity and the critical mass in terms of manpower to address issues of debt management?
Thank you for that question. as I said, we appreciate that debt management is a new area in the country. And that's why, with the modest progress we have made at the debt management office, we thought we should carry the states along. And so, together with the states, we have developed a template for helping them establish their own debt management office. So the whole idea is to address the issue you are raising, the issue of whether they have adequate capacity. There's no need for us to be blaming and to be, fretting over the fact that there's no adequate capacity. We have proactively started and agreed with the states, and we are helping them to develop those capacities which you're observing are not likely to exist for now. So we are closing that gap. We are working with them. We are training the manpower. We are helping them establish the legal structures. We are helping them to set up the institutions themselves, so that in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years, every state in the federation will now have that type of capacity you are talking about.
Keza, Ikechukwu from Enugu would like to know, are you working in tandem with the debt management offices of state governments to harmonize Nigeria's debt profile?
Thank you, Ikechukwu. Yes, we are doing precisely that. The whole idea of working closely with the state, helping them to establish their own debt management departments, is such that even though for now we are providing the services to the states in terms of managing their public debt, particularly external debt, but we want them to be proactive participants. We want it to be participatory, so that it's not just that we from debt management office in Abuja tell them what is happening, but that they should be part of it. It's a collaborative thing. So while we do it, they will also be doing it independently, and we can cross-check ourselves and cross-reference, and we see that we are all on the same page.
Kebayo from Yaba says some states embark on frivolous borrowing, which ultimately leads to private pockets. Is your office empowered to check such abuses?
I would like to believe that you are referring mainly to the past, before DMO was established. And because of such frivolous borrowings that created problems for Nigeria before we now had to exit the Paris and London club debts. But after that, a lot of measures have been put in place to ensure that frivolous borrowing does not take place again. Now, everybody has a role to play in this. In this regard, of course, you know that the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which was signed in 2007, there's the DMO Act, and in any case, there's the Investments and Securities Act, which covers certain aspects of borrowing, particularly from the domestic market. Therefore, the challenge now is for every stakeholder, the civil society, the legislators, every Nigerian, to ensure that they play their roles in monitoring, in asking questions, in controlling, in demanding transparency, accountability, and probity. And there's enough provisions in the Fiscal Responsibility Act empowering every Nigerian with the right to go to the courts to demand that any individual, public official, or public institution accounts for their borrowing.
So, in theory, that exists. You keep dwelling on this Fiscal Responsibility Act, but aggrieved. What channels are open in real terms?
In real terms, every Nigerian, well, in Nigeria, I'm not sure there's anything like a common man. Every Nigerian has all the integrity and the dignity that is conferred on him or her as a Nigerian. Now, there are things you can do directly yourself. In every society, there are things you do directly. There are things you do through your agents. And in this instance, we have elected certain people who are our legislators, our representatives. So things you cannot pursue by yourself, you can pursue through your representatives, other political representatives or economic representatives. But you do have, there's no Nigeria that doesn't have representatives in one sector or the other, economic representatives, political representatives.
And is class action possible?
Religious representatives. So you